All right, so we'll go through this really quickly here. I know it's lunchtime and people have places to be come 1 o'clock, so I'll try to get through this. But before we get started, some things to think about. What if the earth were a village? Okay, 100 people. Okay, so let's kind of divide that out here. What do you think? There'd be 57 Asians, 21 Europeans, 14 North and South Americans, and there'd be 8 Africans, right? What else do we have? We would have 80 in substandard housing, right? Just some things to think about there. We would have 70 would be unable to read. We'd have 1 with a college education, all right? And 0 would have a computer, all right? Just so you kind of figure that out, all right? We'd have 6 people with half of the wealth. They would all be United States citizens, right? All right. We'd have 6 over the age of 65, 33 children, and 4 of them would be special needs, all right? If we had a community of 100 people, there'd be 70 persons of color, 30 white. Ooh. All right, let's throw that in there. What else? What else? What else? We'd have 10 gay and lesbian or bisexuals. We'd have 52 females and 48 males. And there'd be 30 Christians, just to kind of throw a little diversity out there. And then for those of you that are kind of monolingual, there'd only be 9 English speakers, right? So some things to think about when we talk about working with Native communities. You have to remember that Native communities actually they're not a first world, they're not a second world. Oftentimes maybe a third world, but oftentimes, especially in the United States, it's a fourth world environment. This is a very, very different kind of community. It's a place that we run into all sorts of different types of situations that we may not have thought about yet. And I have one more in here, just in case you were wondering. There'd be 1 near death, and there'd be 1 near birth. Just for yucks. There it is. So, all right. So before we begin, how do we define native? Right? What's native? How do you define native? So some things to think about. And how do we define ourselves? Right? Are you a native El Pasoan? Right? And what does that mean? Does that mean that you're native? I don't know. All right? Is it a psychological issue? I mean, is it the way that we process that makes us different? Is it a sociological issue? Or is it an anthropological issue? You know, are there different ways that we look at things? And really and truly, it's a combination of all these things. It's cultural for me. I think this is a cultural issue. So when we talk about natives, we really want to talk about culture and how to deal with culture in a different environment. And so how do we define culture, so to speak? Well, there are different patterns of culture. You know, what is culture? Culture is, of course, patterns of human behavior. It includes thoughts, actions, customs, your beliefs. It often passes from one generation to another and may be shaped by race and ethnicity, of course. And we use those terms kind of interchangeably, you know, ethnicity, race, but there really is a difference there. You know, how do you identify with your how do you identify yourself? Your sense of ethnicity is their sense of identification within a group of people. It often includes race and culture, but may not. It can be a religious belief. It can be history, language. When talking about race, it's a biological connection with a group. But what about native? So are you native El Pasoan? Right? How many native El Pasoans here? Okay, so the native El Pasoans there. Native Texans? Who's not from Texas? All right, everybody out. Okay, so here we are in our happy home. How do we define natives? Let's talk a little bit about that. It's a cultural belief, but you know, some things I'll throw out at you. This is one of my favorite things in El Paso is this. Yeah, what are these? Anybody know? Matachines, right? Matachines. What's a matachines? What's a matachin? One of these guys, right? What is a matachin? Right? Anybody? Was anybody here a matachin? Yeah? Very nice, very nice. So what's a matachin? What is a matachines? When you see matachines, what are these? Okay, so actually the guy that's waving at me is one of my patients. and he's waving at me because he wants me to go and give him a blood pressure prescription. So All right, so here's one of my patients. He's asking me for stuff. Very, very nice man. He's a matachin. What is a matachin? Well, a matachin, these are Native American dancers to the Virgin of Guadalupe. So we have a Native American dance with a drum and bows and arrows with traditional Native American garb that is being given towards a Catholic saint. This is the ultimate combination of Southwestern Catholicism and Native cultures. And so when we talk about who we are and what our culture is as far as being Native, and deals with a lot of things. How about this one here? What's uña de gato? Okay, it's a cat's claw, right? When you directly translate it, cat's claw. Okay, but this isn't a cat's claw. Okay, it's not like someone goes and grabs your cat and cuts the claw off. It's a weed. Okay, it's actually a weed. It grows around here actually fairly well. And it actually helps to, well, not helps, it is believed to help in a lot of medicinal purposes. Actually, people have tried to use it for diabetes in time, that kind of thing. So it's something to think about. When we talk about Native and people from an area, how do you define yourself? When we talk about customs and beliefs, is this what we're talking about? And to some extent, it may be. Okay, great picture of one of my friends. This is when I was out in San Elizario. This was my night float service. She's a good friend of this university. Paul Foster and her family is as well. This is Miss Cortez, and she was my night float. She was a local healer. Okay, she was a lady who would actually call the office and say, "You need to go see this kid. All right, you need to go do this and do that," because there's certain things about being Native, about being a folk healer. She would know, hey, this kid's really in trouble. And she, of course, it was her rubbing an egg on me. And they're looking at the egg, and she actually looked at it and said, hey, it looks pretty good. There's the egg. And she said, just a little white spot there. And I had some medical students at the time, so they said, that's the medical students. It's causing issues. All right, so when we talk about native populations, we're really talking about a mixture of things. We're talking about Native culture, we're talking about race, and we're talking about ethnicity. And it is in that sweet spot right in the middle that we find many of the Native cultures in this area. And I'll talk a little bit about that. But really and truly, these things, I've had lots of interactions with culture and cultural competency education within our university and beyond. And some of us that are a little bit older have been around here a little bit longer. Myself, Dr. Scheidlauer, we may remember all sorts of cultural competency initiatives that we've done throughout the years. And there's been some really good stuff done, and there's been some really maybe not as good stuff done. But really and truly thinking about culture and thinking about race and ethnicity, that sort of sweet spot in the middle there, when all of them are in combination, you're dealing with individuals that may view things differently than you. And that's what we're talking about. We have to remember that in dealing with a different type of culture, a different type of ethnicity, a different race, brings in different ideas, not just about what health is, but what about everything is and how you approach life. So let's do something here. We're going to look at some cultural issues in health, and I'm going to kind of cruise through this really quickly here. Culture issues, we talk about assimilation, marginalization, and integration of people, and there's different models of acculturation that I can throw up here, and it's great, wonderful, and you can read about them, and it's very boring for lectures, but let's do this. Let's talk about a couple of things. Control and decision making. There's a white side and a black side, okay? Which one do you identify with? When you think about your life, are you interested in personal control, or do you believe in fate? Right? Do you believe in making change, or do you believe in holding on to tradition? Do you believe in self-help, or do you believe in your birthright and your inheritance gives you your ability to get out of things? Do you believe in materialism or spiritualism? And is religion a segment of your life, or is religion a way of life for you? Right? So just think about it for yourself. When we think about civic ideas, right? Do you believe in equality or hierarchy? Do you believe in individualism or group welfare? Practicality or idealism? Competition, cooperation? Action, work-oriented or being-oriented? Or being orientation, like my being is oriented. Work to meet the family's needs, or do you work to get ahead? Are you in harmony with nature, or do you show mastery over nature? Okay. Throw something else at you. Social interactions. Is our society, is there an emphasis on age or is there an emphasis on youth? That's a big one for us. Do you live with an extended family or a nuclear family? Is there giving and sharing or is there taking and saving? Right? Modesty versus self-attention, excellence, excellence thinking group excellence or excellence in the individual excellence. Children participate in everything, adults participate in everything. You know, do the children participate with adults or do the adults participate with the children? The way you look at it is actually the way that, you know. I'll throw a couple more at you. Communication is directness, openness, or indirectness. Is it informal or is it formal? When you listen, do you work on your listening skills? Do you work on your verbal skills? Are you a talker or non-talker? This is a big one. Eye contact, lack of eye contact. Gestures, lack of movement. Touch or lack of touch. Right? A lot of these things and especially the medical students and everybody here in the room, you know, you walk into a job interview, what's your eye contact like? You know, medical school interview, what's your eye contact like? What's your handshake like? We think a lot about those things. You know, and I'll come back and talk about that. I like this one personally, time. Are you past or present oriented? Or are you future oriented? Patience or aggression? Are you aggressive or do you sit back and let it flow? Right? Time is when everyone arrives or is time when it's time? Right? Right? Everyone's laughing because it's like, oh yeah, I know that guy. So I throw a little bit out before I start talking about natives specifically. When we think about those kinds of questions, it puts things into a very, to me it makes things a little bit more palatable, a little bit more tasteful. There really are different ways to approach different aspects of our lives. When we talk about how we approach our civic, our personal, our family, you know, when we think about things as far as time, we cannot be different. Yes, we're talking about the same sort of idea, but there is different perspectives to all these aspects of life. Health will be one of those things. So when we talk about taking someone that has from a different culture or a different aspect of life, we really talk about also them having to deal with us in the culture of Western medicine. So what's our biggest thing in the culture of Western medicine is of course this, right? It's cure, right? We're always looking for cures. Well, I'll cure you that, this or that, or I'll make you better. But do we really cure? Is it really us? Do we really do that, or does the patient do it on its own? And what's the patient's version of that? You know, they're coming to us and we're giving them medicine, or we're helping set a bone, or we're helping them with a health issue. Is it really us curing? You know, but we believe in cure. That's our goal. Dominance over nature. We will take over the infection, right? It's dominance over nature. And we need to do something. You know, the days where Sir William Auster would hold the hand of a child to watch the child get over measles or mumps or rubella, you know, are long gone. We don't teach watchful waiting anymore. I mean, how many of the medical students in the room have ever been asked to just sit with the patient? Are you kidding? What a waste of time. Oh my God. You actually sit with a patient. Right? But in the old days, that was part of it. That was what you did as a medical student. Timeliness is, of course, sooner rather than later. Get it done now. And, you know, for our therapeutic, we're aggressive. Stronger is always better, right? And is that really so? And the way we approach time, Western medicine is completely future-oriented, right? We plan newer, better, bigger, stronger, better drugs. You know, we're always producing better medicine in the future, trying to do that. And then the cool thing is that we want to treat everyone the same. We standardize so that it's effective. And we're very happy about it. You know, we are, quote unquote. We love talking about evidence-based medicine, right? Which basically is the evidence shows that if we do this, this, and this, we are treating them as standard of care. But does that really take the individual into account? Right? It doesn't, and the good doctors know that. And that's something to kind of put in your cap there. All right. So we'll start talking about some things. So for the last 2 years, as of this, I ended this August. I was the medical director for the Estado del Sur Pueblo here in El Paso, and dealing with the Estado del Sur Pueblo. How many of you have ever ever been down there to the Isla del Sur Pueblo, right? So in case you didn't know, those of you, we actually have a Native American tribe within the city limits of El Paso County. It is a Native American tribe. Wasn't for many years, so some history with that. Who are these guys and how did the Native American tribe get to El Paso? So working with the Native American tribe, history is very important. The Isla del Sur Pueblo, which really means the Pueblo of Isleta South Edition. If you want to go to the North Edition, that's just out on the outskirts of Albuquerque. They are part of the Pueblo people, and actually were in the Great Pueblo Revolt back in the 1600s. These were the individuals that were brought back down the Rio Grande South, enslaved by the Spaniards, and settled here in El Paso. So they didn't come here on their own volition. These are the guys that were brought here by the Spaniards under armed means as laborers for the Spaniards. So this Pueblo developed, actually, and has been here since the 1600s, and has been kind of part of El Paso since then. They are Pueblo people, and so what does that mean? Pueblo people, if you think about, Pueblos, you think about sort of their agrarian in nature, and their belief system is sort of Kachinadal issues, right? So there are gods and their idea of creation and their idea of health and what things that happen to you have to deal with sort of the Pueblo culture or the Kachinadal culture. That being said, we have a really unique tribe here, and I encourage everyone to kind of get out and see some of the tribe. The tribe actually, like as it says here, came from northern New Mexico, and they're actually, Isla del Sur Pueblo is kind of the official name. We call them Tigua, right? They're the Tigua Indians, right? But actually, that has nothing to do with their naming. Tigua is the language they speak. So Tiwa. So the Isla del Norte tribe speaks Tiwa. The Jaramillo tribe still does. There's a couple other tribes. The Jimenez tribe still kind of does a little bit. So there's a bunch of tribes, Pueblo tribes up in northern Mexico that still speak the same language. These guys had a really hard time of it. The tribe here in El Paso lost a lot of culture. And how did that happen? Well, let's talk about what it was like first and foremost. They came down as basically slaves for the Spaniards and worked in an agrarian, basically worked for the Spaniards as laborers. Keeping their culture and living together, the Spaniards actually gave them a bunch of land. And it was associated with our famed mission of Isleta, right? They have this intimate tie with the mission. And if you look at the mission, it's a unique sort of deal. Anybody ever go to the other missions? Right? You ever see all the missions? If you haven't seen all the missions, you see all the missions. So let's note a couple of differences here. I know, and anybody here go to church? Right? Go to church? Right? Somebody go to church? Okay. All right. So when you go to church, doesn't matter what church denomination you are, what's the first thing you do when you go to church is you look for a good parking spot. Right? That's always the first thing. Right? So you get in, get out quick. Right? Because why? Because the Cowboys play. Right? So you got to watch the game. So when you go to church, you look for a good parking spot. Where's the best parking spot for the church? Right outside the front door, right? Or right outside the side door, right? Notice there's only one door. Well, actually there's a couple of doors now, but when the church was originally built, it's designed, there is one door in and out. Can you park there? No. What is that crazy thing out in the front there? Right? There's a slab there, people walk out, but then we got this sort of rectangular gravel thing. That's a ceremonial ground for the tribe. So when they come and actually have a lot of their dances, that's where it takes place. Actually, they also have a sacred area that is actually a couple of blocks away from the church called the Tuzla, which is where the sacred drum lives. We'll talk about that in a second. Okay. So I talk about kivas and I talk about Pueblo tribes. They are Pueblos. You can still buy bread there. They bake bread. They believe in all sorts of they believe in all sorts of recipes to help them with their bread making. There's also it's a lot of competition. Lots of the areas. Lots of competitions for that. They do have their own health center, which is what I was part of, and it's a great tribe because it works together. There's no mistaking that's my bald head sitting there working with members of the tribe. So saying that, it's a great area to work with. So talk a little bit about the Tiguas. The Tiguas are a very wonderful people, but like I said, they were the enslaved. So they lost a lot of their culture when they first came here. And they have tried for the last 400 years to regain a lot of their culture. So they're very, very interested and aggressive about trying to gain back a lot of the heritage that was driven out of them by the Spaniards. But it's not just the Spaniards. So if you look back in the census records of El Paso, the Tiguas, when they were originally granted land around the mission, they were granted a huge portion of land. Let's just say they were granted basically everything that includes the town of Socorro, up to I-10 and down to the Rio Grande. Okay, so there's a lot of land, huge amounts of land. However, because they had originally been slaves and then freed, and they were laborers, you had lots of land with which you had to pay taxes on. And the taxes delivered to them by the people of El Paso, quote unquote, and the county of El Paso, were very stiff. And so in order to pay, and some of this was unfair, in order to pay for the taxes, they would annex and sell parts of land. Wow. So if you were someone in political power, okay, in the 1800s in El Paso, and you wanted some land, you could go ahead and levy a tax against the Tiguas and say, yeah, but you know what, I can make this go away if you give me the corner lot, an acre or two here and an acre or two there. And that's how they lost the majority of their land. So now all that they have is a very small parcel just right next door to the mission. Now, let's fast forward a little bit. Back into the 1990s or so, Speaking Rock came to being, right? Hey, casino, right? So they made a lot of money. But you can't gamble in Texas unless you're the government. Okay? If you're the state of Texas, you can gamble like crazy. Okay? But if you're not the state of Texas, you can't gamble. There's a couple other tribes that have had little places here. The Chickasaw have a place in Texas, and they have a boat that they get on and gamble on the boat, which is kind of odd. But that being said, you can't gamble in Texas, and so basically the state shut Tigua down. Now, how does that work? Well, see, the Tiguas were an enslaved population. They fought for generations to be recognized as a tribe. And what happened was that the United States really doesn't like designating Native American tribes because it costs us a lot of money. I understand that, but to some extent, there's some injustice there, and we're still dealing with some of that in our legislature. So finally, in our lifetimes, some of us lifetimes, in the 1960s, actually, there began a movement to actually recognize the Tiguas, the Isla del Sur Pueblo, as an individual tribe, right? It went to the 1960s and they was signed. But there was something that was kind of put there that was horribly, horribly wrong. Was that in 1960s they said, yes, we'll let you be a tribe, but there's a blood quantity. You have to show a certain amount of blood quantity to call yourself Tigua. And so what that means is that if you have a small population living within a large city, there's intermingling, right? Intermingling. It's kind of like what we do with the medical students, right? We want you to intermingle, right? Meet our local men and women, right? And then you stay, right? Same sort of deal, right? So what happens is the blood quantity begins to lower and lower and lower and lower. And that is the ultimate death of a tribe, right? So to this day, well, actually to this year, existed. And actually we were getting down to a point where the numbers, instead of growing, were declining. Because I could see the mom and the dad in the clinic, but I couldn't see their kid. Even though their kid's being raised as part of the tribe, I can't see him because they don't officially meet the blood quantity. All right. So that being said, they actually got the quantity raised and removed to some extent this year. So still to this time in the year 2013, this is still something that they're dealing with. Okay. So talking about the Tiguas, Pueblo culture really looks at health as a direct result of the things you do in your life, right? And so spiritually, culturally, civically is a direct result of that. There are many, many aspects to that are unique to the Pueblos. They believe in the Cachinas, and they believe in sacred objects. So the heart of the tribe here in El Paso is the huanchito, the drum. Okay, and the drum it's a sacred object that comes back from when they were in northern New Mexico. It's the same drum they've been using for 400 or 500 years. And that drum is a sacred part of the tribe. And in fact, to be sort of the spiritual lead of the tribe, you actually have to fast and stay with the drum. And the drum chooses you. It sounds a certain way when you're the chosen one to the tribe. And so they choose that. And it's actually a really unique culture. So very unique Pueblo culture, Kachinas, very agrarian in background, and view of health is very, very related to the things that they do in this life. Let's compare that with these guys. Anybody ever seen this? No, not quite sure what that is? Okay, this is the health center and small little hospital on the Mescalero Reservation outside Ruidoso. Okay, all right, so Mescalero Apaches. So, disclaimer, please remember, the Mescalero Apaches and the Pueblo Indians are mortal enemies. Okay, nowadays, yeah, they would talk to each other and work together, but the traditional songs, they talk about each other bad, in a bad way, okay? You don't ever mix the two. And so even though these guys have been sort of out here and it's the closest IHS hospital, nobody from here goes there. Everybody goes to Albuquerque because that's where the other Pueblo tribes are, right? Right? So just some things to remember. There's definitely tribes. Just because you're Native American doesn't mean that you get along with all the other Native Americans, okay? So I had the opportunity when I was a resident to go and spend some time up in here. And in those days, I didn't really moonlight, but there were moonlight opportunities for residents to come up here. And it actually has, it's an 8-bed hospital. You can have people stay there overnight, which is kind of crazy. It is across the way from the big the church that's there. As you drive to Ruidoso, it's on your right-hand side, and most people see the church. So if you go up there and you see the church, look the other way and you'll see the hospital, right? That's why nobody ever recognizes it, because everyone's like, ooh, cool looking church, right? And the hospital's on the other side. But again, kind of striking, it is an interesting mixture of both Christendom and Native American religion. I love so there's a teepee out in the front and then the church in the back. And the teepee the skeleton of the teepee is an interesting sort of sign for the Native American culture. But, okay, it's straightforward. The Mescalero Apaches never use teepees. Okay, it's not. They're a Plains culture. They belong to the Plains Indians. Mescalero Apaches, kind of a lot of wiki-ups, which if you're interested in talking about wiki-ups and what they used to live in, that we can talk later. But an interesting mixture of both back and forth. This was the medical staff, including me. Okay, just so you know. And so let's talk a little bit about the differences between Pueblo Indians and Apaches. So this is a picture of the crown dancers, which are the warriors and protectors of the mountain and sort of the heart of the Apache tribe. These guys, it's actually really cool. I was very fortunate enough to actually get invited to a quinceañera, quote unquote, a coming of age ceremony, which usually happens in the springtime, which happened to be the time I was working up there. And you kind of go out in the middle of the night and they have this sort of 2-day festival. And in the middle of the night, you're sitting there and people are dancing the ceremonial dances around the fire. The local families are dancing, that kind of thing. And then you hear way off in the distance, you hear like these guys out there. Like there's someone going out there. And then the little dude out in the corner there, he's Coyote. And what he'll do is he runs by. And you'll see him run through the parking lot and he'll run around he's checking everything out and then he runs back. And you're like, what was that? Okay. It's like, I just saw some 13-year-old run through here really quickly. Right? Great. But then things will get really, really dark and you're sitting there and you forgot about Coyote because everybody else is running around. And then all of a sudden, as if in ambush, these guys appear out of the woods, whoosh, at one time. And it is a very unique sight. It's an interesting, wonderful cultural aspect. And you can see how back, yeah, you can give me all the Freddy Krueger movies, but it's pretty scary when they appear, right? It's actually pretty impressive when you see it. Mescalero Apaches. Apaches for the most part, and we got a bunch of them in the area. Just in case you're not familiar or not from the area, Mescaleros are the closest. Mescalero Apache land is a huge swath of land south of Ruidoso, in between Ruidoso and Cloudcroft. There are actually 2 Apache tribes, though, however, that live on that land. Anybody know the other? Chiricahua Apaches. Okay, so why do I mention both? The Mescalero Apaches actually kind of worked it out. Okay, they actually were able to claimed land and said, hey, if you're putting everybody on a reservation, here's our reservation. We're going to take this land. We said, great, go for it. The government of the United States granted it to them, and they stayed. Chiricahua Apaches, that is the branch of Apache Nation that Geronimo was a part of. Right? These are the guys that evaded the 4th and 5th Cavalry for years and years and years and years and years, 12 years actually, through the Gila outside of Silver City for the most part. They were punished in that they took that band of Chiricahuas and put them in Florida for a while. And then they were able to relocate them back into the West. A quarter of them stayed in Oklahoma and the rest of them came here. So actually there's a little bit difference. You have two tribes living together. They share a same theology and the same background, but they definitely self-identify as being either Chiricahua or Mescalero. So just kind of an interesting sort of deal there. These guys are much more in your face, right? Very, very quiet, very stoic. I went to a childbirth while I was there, helped deliver an 8-pound baby. The mother did not say a word. Period. Very, very, strength is very important in this culture. And they will not tell you that they're hurting. You'll see them hurting, but they will not. It is not acceptable. All right, in the culture. I mean, it just really is amazing to kind of see. In addition to that, very different. We're very familiar because it's, you know, if you read a Tony Hillerman book, sometimes you deal with the Navajo nations, and he'll talk about the Pueblo nations, and they'll talk about the different kinds of deities, you know, the Kachina doll deities and the Kachina religion. And I think a lot of Maine culture, American Western culture, when we think about Indians, that's what we think about. But these guys are a little bit different. They have a different sort of deal. The heart of their universe comes from the mountains. Is very, very wilderness oriented. They're hunter-gatherers. Were not as agrarian as the Pueblos were. They were very, very, not necessarily nomadic, but still continue that sort of thought process. Okay? And in saying so, when they talk about health, that's the way they talk about, is they talk about health in terms of strength. Right? It's all about strength. Will this make me stronger, or will it make me weaker? The crown dancers live here. This is Ski Apache, right? Sierra Blanca. And this is actually the favorite time here. This is actually right after like a light snowfall. And if you look, the dancers will tell you that when the people will tell you that when you get a light snowfall, that the dancers will show themselves. And what they try to say is, you can see there's a feather. The feather kind of goes up this way on the mountain, right? And then there's the stem in the middle. So it's just a picture of the feather. It's actually the highest mountain in the area. So for yours truly, that's a little kind of, you're not supposed to climb up there, but if you were, that's what you might see. Right? So those are our two native tribes of this area that you may see, and actually 3 because we have to add the Chiricahuas into there. So 2 very different views of health. One that says, hey, Pueblo, what I do in life comes back to me, quote unquote. The other one that says, I am strong or I am not strong, and the gods will take from me what they take. Okay? Some overlapping, sure, when we talk about things like fate, those first initial questions. There's some underlying things, but ironically, there really is some differences between the two. But I'm going to kind of go back a little bit, and let's talk about cultural competency as providers. You know, we talk about the trans-theoretical model of behavioral change when we talk about, oh, you know, are you pre-contemplative or contemplative? We get you to stop smoking. When we talk about teaching cultural competency, we talk about the same sort of thing. And there are guys who are culturally destructive. Okay, so you got to be kind of careful. And those are going to be providers that when individuals of different backgrounds and different beliefs will go to you, actually they try to dismiss and say, what? No, don't do that. Do this. Right? That's good. That's foolish. You know, there's no reason for you to, you know, an owl saw you. The different kind of ideas about owls. Owls are an interesting sort of deal. The Pueblo Indians, owls are sort of an interesting sort of, they're not necessarily, they're a good thing sometimes when you see owls. For the Navajo and for Apaches, owls are harbingers of death. So don't mix the two. Okay, right? For Pueblo Indians, what was it? Pueblo Indians, they're very, very happy, and you talk about a woman being pregnant. It's wonderful, right? A baby, and you start thinking about baby names. In Apache religions, you don't actually ever refer to the fetus as an individual until it's born. You would be a very bad provider if you do. And those kind of little things are cultural differences that you wouldn't know just walking into that society. And so someone who is culturally destructive doesn't really open their mind to those ideas. Culturally incapacity means that you don't intend to be, right? You know, you understand that there's a difference, but that maybe you don't understand that. And then we talk about cultural blindness, which is a little bit better, the pre-competence phase, and then of course the competence phase. And I'm not going to go through all of this, but I'll make my lecture available to you all. If you wish to download it, you can. And it basically ends with cultural proficiency and fluency. And it's a continuum. I mean, this is, you know, learning to be better with different cultures is important, but there's a couple of tools that I'd like to give you and talk about today. So let's say you were thrusted upon a native culture, and we had you go work with the White Mountain Apaches in eastern Arizona. And you had to actually kind of come up with, oh man, what do I do? What don't I say? Well, first and foremost is always kind of befriending the staff, because they will kind of guide you. But there's no real way to kind of make yourself culturally competent overnight. Patients' understandings of illness is important. And this is kind of the crux of my lecture to you today. If you learn one thing, it's the next 3 slides. And then we'll go from there. But wherever I've gone, whether it's been in the Southwest with different native tribes or across the world with different native cultures in the Himalayas, I've found a couple of things to be universally true. One, no one ever thinks like me, ever. Why? Because I'm a Western taught guy. Right? I live in terms of microbes and evidence-based medicine and resistant factors. Nobody thinks of those things, okay? And usually illness is either something that I ingested, I get sick because I ingested or came in contact with an infection, or there has been a malfunction in one of the biomechanical processes in my body. Nobody thinks like that, okay? Nobody else in the world thinks like that but us, okay? So some things to think about. So when you approach a patient or a culture, a cadre of patients in a different environment, how do I overcome that? That's hard because this is who I am. I'm a Western doctor, and I come with a set of preset knowledge that I believe is true. I think that antibiotics work. I think that there are biomechanical factors involved in illness, and I think that if I can control those things and control my nature, I can actually cure people. Okay? But a lot of people don't think that. And so how do you get to the bottom of it, right? You want to ask, what's the cause? What's the severity? What do you expect? And actually, this is not anything new. This is old, right? Lots of people have been doing this for years. In fact, this is the thing that I use whenever I go anywhere. I use this thing called the climate explanatory model. And I'll give you a case report on how I've used this before. I had an individual who had a heart attack. And I had seen her and knew that she was a very sort of local person and had used a lot of local folk remedies and maybe didn't really believe in some of the things I was doing. But okay, got it. So when she came to see me because she was sick, and I saw her, and she says, my stomach aches a whole bit, and I had been sick for a number of days. I went ahead and I treated the stomach ache. I really looked at her, and something wasn't right. I said, follow up the next day. You should be feeling better. She wasn't. And so finally, somewhere in my brain, probably way too late, I said, you know what, let's get an EKG. She's having a heart attack. Send her to the hospital. Boom, she goes to the hospital. 3-vessel cabbage later, she's back out. And then about 6 weeks later, she stops taking her meds altogether. I'm like, are you kidding? What's wrong with you, right? It was like, you had a heart attack, we need to continue the meds. I figured out what was wrong with me. I was feeling very depressed. And then at about 6 weeks after my cabbage, I started giving myself a blessing. And I was able to start feeling better. So for the medical students in the room, is it common to have depression after a heart event? Yes. When do you actually start feeling better after having a cabbage? About 6 weeks, right? Sternum begins to knit, doesn't hurt to laugh, right? Doesn't hurt to cough, go to the bathroom. So So I'm sitting there and I can't figure out what's going on. And finally I said, okay, I don't understand why she stopped. She's like, no, it's too expensive. I'm like, but you're able to afford it. I gave you the $4 ones, and they're all for, you know, I know your daughters are paying for some of this. And I don't know. So then I thought, so what happened? So I gave myself a blessing. I started to feel better. I'm like, so what do you think was wrong with you? What do you call the problem? What happened to you? I was bewitched. Like, okay, so you're bewitched. So who bewitched you, right? The neighbor lady across the street, right, has been always my husband who died, I don't know, like 15, 20 years ago. Her and him, and I broke it off, and da-da-da, and ever since it back and forth. So, okay, why did it start when it did? Well, we had an argument over a dog. It was her grandson's dog, and he was in my yard, and I kicked him out. And I'm thinking, okay, I got it. So what do you think the illness does? What do you think it does to you? I think the illness, her bewitchment, she squeezed my heart, caused it to have decreased blood flow, right? And therefore had a heart attack. And that's what the curse did for her. I'm thinking, okay, and now that you've started doing this, is it unsqueezing? Yes, I'm removing the evilness. It takes a number of weeks, but I'm removing the evilness by doing these sort of maneuvers on myself. So, okay. The other thing that you can ask is, so how do you think we should be treated? What's the most important thing to treat this? Well, I got to continue blessing myself. And then it says, what are the chief problems that the illness has caused? Well, it gave me a heart attack, and now my heart is weaker than it used to be. And then what do you fear most? That she will curse me again. Right? And I won't be strong enough for it. So, okay. So after going through the 8 questions, I had a whole different view of what my patient was talking about. And I've done the same 8 questions with less dramatic events, but still very, very clinically important information that comes out of that everywhere I've gone, whether it's been in New Mexico, whether it's been here, dealing with a native culture here, whether it's been in the Himalayas, whether it's been in Africa. I've run into this all the time. And I encourage you, the Kleinman explanatory model. Learning to use the Kleinman explanatory model is a very, very important tool for anybody who actually goes overseas or works with native cultures. I cannot tell you in a 50-minute lecture how to be culturally competent in dealing with Native American cultures. But I can give you a tool that helps you to see that the differences between what you're thinking in your mind and the way your patient is thinking in his or her mind. And if you can appreciate that difference, that's the first step in being culturally naive into being culturally aware. Okay? So if you're going to download, and like I said, I'll make it available, these 8 questions are things that you should put into there. I actually have a little laminated card that I keep in my backpack when I go places. There are a lot of other models. I didn't want to just give you one. I want everybody gets their fair share. You know, I didn't want to be bad to Berlin here, but he did the LEARN model, which is listen to the patient's perspective. And I like the Kleinman better personally, but here's the LEARN model for our education here. They also have a RESPECT model, which is also, it's a rapport with the patient. It talks about seeing the patient's point of view. Notice again, empathy, support, and partnership with the patient. And then the last 3, it's explanations, and then cultural competence, thinking about and then the idea of developing trust. So, I mean, respect is well known. All right, so a couple other cultures you might kind of work with. Anybody been here? Anybody know where that is? The mountain somewhere. Is it mountains? Are they mountains? Or is it a canyon? Are we looking down or are we looking up? So we're looking down, actually, right? We're looking down. So the sun is behind us, right? So we're standing on the western edge of Copper Canyon. If you've never been there, it's an incredibly beautiful place. There's some phenomenal mountain biking. Okay, so the Tarahumara, famed in the book Born to Run, right? As a sports medicine doctor and as a amateur marathoner, these guys are my heroes, the Tarahumaras. They're a tribe of Native Americans. Okay, if we talk about Native Americans, they're in Mexico. and they are phenomenal endurance individuals. And they run in huachakas, or sandals, basically. They're barefoot runners. And that's where the whole barefoot, anybody here have a pair of Merrill 5 fingers? They got one back there, a couple of guys over here. You can thank this guy, okay? Right, this guy is the originator of the Merrill 5 fingers. And what it is nowadays, if you're not a runner, let me explain. Nowadays, there's a big craze in the running community that you don't really wear shoes, you wear like slippers. Okay, they're shoes that just have very minimal support, just a sort of a rubber edge on the bottom so you don't hurt your feet running on rocks or whatever. But there's no support in the shoe. You can fold the shoe in half, actually, easily. They're minimalist running, and they do it. It changes your gait. As a normal runner, you're a heel striker. When you do a minimalist run, you're a forefoot striker. It changes the way you actually run. And these guys run, they're forefoot strikers, and they run amazing distances. I was there one time. And during Holy Week, they have lots of ceremonies where they'll sort of dress. And of course, this is very sort of Central American. They'll paint themselves dressed, and they'll run from camp to camp or village to village. Like, you want to come with us? I'm like, sure. Yeah, that was a mistake. Gone. I'll stay here. And then other cultures, if you go around the world, that's Pasang and Pula, two of my Sherpa friends. Sherpa culture is a whole different kind of culture, dealing with natives. Natives it's amazing to see the difference in native cultures throughout the world. Again, completely foreign. Sherpa culture is an interesting. Sherpa culture is very Buddhist, very Hindu. They believe that you are tied to your fate and your destiny, and you work all your life. So carrying loads is very common, and whether you're old or young, you'll work because there's good karma in working. As I said, very very Buddhist. This is Lama Geshe, who actually blessed Sir Edmund Hillary when he went up Everest for the first time. And then there's also the Hindu factor that plays into it. And Reed Nepal is there, and you can find some of the Hindu holy men that sit there and welcome pilgrims. So Sherpa culture, a very different kind of culture. It is an Asian culture. I've worked with them to some extent, and will continue to work with them from this point onward. And hopefully, maybe in a number of years, I may be able to take some of you with me. As we begin to develop relationships with clinics up there and develop a international rotation for you all in the Himalayas. Sherpa culture is very Buddhist, and they believe that what they do to you will come back to them, so they're very kind. And it is a very interesting, you can't really have that many people living together in harmony without some kind of a overlying thought of being kind. Obviously, they're human and human nature. Yes, there is crime and there's all sorts of things to be worried about. But I'm not going to go into talking about it. But I don't speak Nepalese. I don't speak Mandarin or Cantonese either, which are sort of, and I don't speak any of the dialects from India. So putting me in the Himalayas is a little bit of an issue, right? dealing with the Sherpa culture, it's a little bit of an issue as a physician. And one of the ground rules to the Himalayan Rescue Association, the Wilderness Medical Society, which are the individuals that send me, is that we charge the climbers like crazy because they're very rich Western climbers, very rich, right? But we don't charge the Sherpas anything. And so dealing with that, I've had to deal with all sorts of Sherpa issues. Last year, I got to join a couple of colleagues of mine, and we got called out to go look at a yak. It's the first house call. I've done lots of house calls, but never to a yak. Then the yak, we actually sedated the yak. I didn't know how much to use, so we were able to get, I had a sat phone, and we got online, and I knew that there was a buffalo. I knew there was a website where you could figure out how to sedate a buffalo. Right? So I just figured, it's kind of similar, right? So we sedated it. We sewed it up, and it had this huge laceration on the belly of it and went straight through. And I'm sitting there and I'm looking around. I'm like, it probably got caught on another yak's horn. And the Sherpa who was in charge of the yak, who owned the yak, So no, horn injuries are a lot more, they're not so clean, whatever. I think this was snow leopard. And I looked at him like he had just told me that Santa Claus had arrived. And I'm like, yes, snow leopard, cool. But of course realizing that probably wasn't there. It probably wasn't snow leopard. But that being said, very, very humble individuals. Very, very different culture. And because it was snow leopard, it was okay for me to wash it out and actually, and because it was a yak, it was okay to do that. Very, very important. Every time I spoke to a Sherpa, I would use a climate explanatory model. I encourage you to memorize it. And dealing with different cultures is very important. I am in no way, shape, or form acculturated to the Sherpa culture, but I encourage you to not be afraid to go to those cultures and to use some of the tools maybe I mentioned today. I'm going to mention one other thing. Ways to improve care is, of course, if you can learn the language, great, but having someone who speaks the language and can communicate with you is always, having the interpreter is great. But it's not just an interpreter of language. You need to have someone who's an interpreter of culture, an interpreter of society. Because when we talk about interpreters here, we're normally talking about, I need someone to speak Spanish. Great, right. But do you understand where this lady is coming from, right? Is it that they speak Spanish, or, yeah, that's great, but what do they mean in the terms of what they're saying? What is the substance behind that? Just a language interpreter is not enough. You need a cultural interpreter. Okay? And then, as I mentioned kind of earlier, is take a personal inventory of your own culture. And especially for us in medicine, we have our own Western medicine culture. And it's very important that I think most of you probably identify like me, in that the way we approach patients is we have a dogma that we follow. Why? Because we're taught that. This is the law and this is the truth. And this is the way that we interact and help to cure our patients. But if you don't take stock of that, you're going to miss things. And you're going to miss opportunities for you to help patients that you could have done. Obviously, being bilingual, having a bilingual staff is great. But written translation, yeah, if it's an emergency stopgap, you can do that. Phone-based interpreters, AT&T provides an interpreter for almost every language. They will charge you for that, but they'll provide you with that. And then actually, this is something I also put on the back of my climate explanatory model. I put this on the back of that card because I sometimes will forget things about using interpreters, is that I always have two, a male and a female. Because sometimes having a male interpreter, especially like in the Sherpa culture, having a male interpreter with a female patient, forget it. Not going to happen. Okay? I'm not going to know a darn thing. But if I have a female interpreter, I will learn twice as much more from a female patient. Right? So always have same sex as a patient. Your interpreter is same sex. Use family members with caution. Right? I mean, how many of you were willing to tell your mom or your dad that you started dating? Right? Exactly. Okay? Right? Learn basic words and phrases, such things like thank you, hello, good morning. That means a lot. It shows that you're going there. Address the patient. I've seen way too many people do this where they have the patient here and the interpreter here, and they walk in and say, tell them that I want this and this and this and this. And it's like, no. Say, hey, I want this and this and this. And usually what I'll do is I'll stand next to the interpreter and I'll look at the patient and say, whatever I'm going to say, hello, good morning, how are you? And I have them interpret. And I think that's probably the best way to do it because my eye contact is on the patient because I want to learn as much as I can from it. And then lastly, and this is part of the Indian Health Service model, basically they talk about this, is whenever you see, and this is actually good practice in any model, is that whenever you give directions to the patient, always have the patient repeat them to you. Because then you kind of figure out what they actually remembered from you and what they didn't. Remember that 70% of the things you say to a patient, even in your own language and your own culture, quote unquote, they don't remember. All right? So when you throw language into the mixture, oh, it's crazy. Okay? It's hard to get that information across. All right, so that's just about it. I think if there are any questions, I'm more than happy to entertain a couple questions for the end of the hour. None? No questions? Yes, sir.
Could you explain to me why the blood lobe down here and the Apaches and the Escalera do not sweat? The Navajos are up in New Mexico, sweat regularly.
All right, so the sweat ceremony is actually Navajo-based. So within the sweat hut, it is sort of a round hut, but it's the sweat hut that we live on is basically here's the earth and we're up top, but it actually is a circle, right? And so the Navajo belief is that you sweat in the circle, and it's a matter of purity. You're sort of intermingling between us and the spiritual world, and finding intervention that way. That is very Navajo in belief.
There are other tribes in the United States that sweat also.
Right.
There's Navajo.
For the most part, though,
Cherokees.
yeah, the Cherokees sweat, and actually a lot of people are sweating nowadays because it's sort of a cross-cultural thing. The Pueblo Indians, for the most part, never sweated, right? They were Kiva, right? So, like if you go to Chaco Canyon, you go down their places of worship, you went down into the earth. They would actually build a structure and went down and would do that. And so that kind of filled that gap for them. They didn't sweat. It just wasn't part of their culture or upbringing. It's a tribal culture, and that's not their tribe. The Pueblos didn't do that. Pueblos, Apaches didn't do that. Only the Navajo did it, and there's others that do it. And actually nowadays it's becoming kind of a trendy thing. You can do it. I know there's a guy who lives like a block and a half away from the Socorro Entertainment Center, that he has sweat ceremonies there, and he's not in any way, shape, or form related to the Tiguas, right? But he's there. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
I'm just curious because when you're working with Native populations in the state, they're considered a separate nation. So how do the legalities of working like?
Okay, so a couple of things. It depends on which tribe you're working with as to how, and where you're working with them as to how separate nation they are. Okay, so the Yeselos Pueblo, the Tiguas here in El Paso, they are a separate nation, but they signed an agreement back when they became recognized as a tribe that they would follow Texas law. So then that's how they're able to stop them from gambling, right? And that's why you have to report to El Paso, to the El Paso County Health Department that, hey, I have a kid with whooping cough, or whatever, because they follow Texas rules. Now, if you go into New Mexico, okay, and you find a kid in Mescalero with whooping cough, okay, that kid, you have to ask, the tribe will tell you that it will give you permission to tell the state of New Mexico. But the tribe has to really intervene there. The tribe has to say, yes, of course, it's a community health issue. And they do. They're very open to that kind of thing. But there's an extra step there, right? And it just has to do with the types of legalities of the tribe itself. And that's important to know.
What about like culturally bound things like leaving the patient out of the equation if there's kind of a terminal illness and talking to the family, things that were, I don't know if those are cultural issues.
No, those are huge cultural issues. Huge cultural issues. So what about those things? What about end-of-life issues? A lot of the native cultures deal with death a lot better than we do. So first and foremost. Secondly, most native cultures will tell you that, hey, a lot of the decisions for passing on to the next life is actually part of the family helping make that decision and helping that person transition. It's very different than the Western culture of, no, death is we have lost, right? And medicine has failed because the patient has died, and nobody likes the person to die because they're not going to be here. There's a permanence loss for Western culture. For the native cultures, and most native cultures I've run into, death is a transition to a different state, but you're not gone. Different thought process. So yes, bringing those types of individual questions are very, though, tribal related, right? Because I would guarantee you that the Pueblo tribes or the Mescalero tribe is going to have views of death a lot different than the Seminoles will or Alaskan natives will. Right? And so that's where getting good interpreters, getting someone from the tribe that understands not just interpreter of language, but interpreter of culture, can help you to sort of navigate that. But it's a good question to ask because a lot of people won't ask that. Anything else?
I have another short one.
Sure.
Well, how do you deal with sexual and physical abuse and substance abuse issues that you encounter? So
the good news is that in most of the Native American tribes, there is already a set format for that. when we talk about substance abuse issues and abuse issues, whether sexual or physical, there is a lot of that on Native American tribes, huge amounts. And as a result of that, the infrastructure of the tribes, and actually for the Bureau of Indian Affairs, the Indian Health Service, has actually put together a process in which each of the tribes has an adult substance abuse program. So for substance abuse, there definitely are their own pathways to doing it. And most of the time, the pathway is to send them to somewhere else, away from the tribe, so they can not only detox, but then go through therapy and work with it. And then there's a reintegration, because you're so enmeshed into the tribe, and usually it's other tribal members that are feeding you the substance. For sexual and physical abuse, most of the tribes have their own court. And so it's a matter of reporting to the tribal authorities, usually the tribal police, that, hey, I have an abuse case here, and they actually carry on the investigation for the tribe, and it goes to the tribal court. Right? Saying that, it's a good thing in that the tribal court oftentimes knows everybody and the perpetrators, and so things get done pretty quickly. On the other flip side of that, the court knows all the people that are doing it, both the victims and the perpetrators. So sometimes it doesn't work as well. Right? But that being said, it's no different than our own system to some extent. However, again, each tribe is going to be a little bit different because they're their own separate nation. However, most tribes do have that tribal court structure. Across the world, it's a different deal. And actually, it's a big barrier in that if you come with me to Everest and somebody beats you up, right, or beats me up, probably more likely, how do I defend myself against that? What's the consequence of that? And there's different cultural repercussions. Thoughts? All right, guys. Thank you so much.